I am live. Get down, Candy. Oh, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't raise my coffee as I go live because Candy the Wonder Dog loves to jump up as soon as she hears the words I am live. It's Gordy Canuck, and you are watching Act One, a Canadian take on news events. And this is my first live stream since July 5th. I've been having some issues. Um, that I'll give you a brief synopsis. But before I do, before I can get going on my video, I have to look after Candy because she has trained me. I have been conditioned that at the start of every video, she has to get one of these. So if you're new to the stream, this is standard operating procedure. I start with giving my dog, Candy the Wonder Dog, 5 years old, a treat. So shake, lay down, squeak. Oh, good bark. And there she goes. Now I have a degree of peace, although gotta let her mow down on that. I have my coffee. As I say, I haven't done a video since July 5th. So it's been 11 days. And normally I publish content several times a week. With the advent of the summer, it's been challenging to get content out because life is busy. And on top of that, I'm dealing with a sciatic nerve issue. Anyone who's had sciatica, and it's where your sciatic nerve gets pinched and pain radiates right down your leg. In my case, it's on my right side. It hasn't reached, I've had this before, and the pain has radiated down to my shin. It hasn't yet gone down to my heel, and hopefully that won't happen. I'm doing the exercises to alleviate it. I'm taking turmeric, which is a spice that is said to have anti-inflammatory properties. It's worked for me in the past. It's not working right now, not yet. Uh, and it's been causing sleeping issues. And then, of course, so that's one reason why I haven't been live. Another is that I haven't been sleeping well because of the pain, and I've still been managing. I haven't. I missed one day at work over the last couple weeks. Because of the pain, I couldn't put my socks on in the morning, and then on top of that, being summer, I have my youngest is playing and practicing soccer, so we have soccer games, soccer practices to go to. So, and life is just busy. And on top of that, the house is busy. I like things to be settled down and quiet in the house before I go live. And with it being summer and no school, we're all staying up later, yada, 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 to quote that old famous Jerry Seinfeld line. Danny has shown up. He's got wishing me a good evening, the praying hands and the cross. I do have my Bible here. Wednesdays, I endeavor to have something, a faith-based message. And it struck me, and I'll get right into the topic of tonight's video, the Scopes monkey trial. And I have to wonder how many people are even aware of the fact that 100 years ago today, there was a trial taking place in Dayton, Tennessee in 1925. And it was considered at the time to be the trial of the century. Forget O.J. Simpson. Uh, the Scopes monkey trial was referred to as the century, the trial of the century back 100 years ago. And it must be remembered that in 1925, radio was a new technology. People don't even think of it as technology in the context of today's world. But in 1920, media outlet. Prior to that, from 100 years ago. And what had happened was all the way back in 1924 and 1925, a school teacher by the name of Scopes, Scopes, as described in the description and everywhere else, was charged with having taught evolution in the public school system in the state of Tennessee. And that state had a law on the books which made it illegal to teach any evolutionary theory, any origin story for life outside of the only origin story for life that you could teach was the biblical story. And so Scopes was charged with teaching evolution, Darwin's theory on the origin of species. And what happened was that the prosecution was led by a gentleman by the name of William Jennings Bryan, a name that many will not be familiar with. Bryan had been a three-time candidate for president of the United States as the Democratic nominee. He ran in 1896, 1900, and again in 1908. And he also served as Secretary of State for Republican Woodrow Wilson, to whom he had lost an election. And can you imagine that in the context of today's world? Can you imagine Bill Clinton giving George H.W. Bush a position in government? Or can you imagine Donald Trump having hired Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden? Or could you imagine Joe Biden hiring Trump? But it was a different era back in the 1920s. There was politics wasn't as weaponized as it is now. So we had William Jennings Bryan leading the case for the prosecution, a prominent national politician who had been a presidential candidate three times. And then the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, with backing from some media outlets, I believe the Chicago Sun-Times newspaper, paid for a prominent lawyer, the most prominent lawyer of his era, Clarence Darrow. And Clarence Darrow was kind of the Johnny Cochrane or the F. Lee Bailey of his era. He was the most famous defense attorney in the United States at the time, and many people would have been aware of who he was. And further, even more interesting is the fact that Clarence Darrow had been a supporter of William Jennings Bryan's political career early on. And then they kind of split ways. And where they split ways was over religion, was over faith. And so the trial pitted these two giants, one political giant of the political world, and another was a giant of the legal world. And I'll remind you right now, I'll take a little pause. You're welcome to like, subscribe, share the channel, and likewise to fill up the comment field on the live stream if you're watching live, and later to fill up the commentary down below. At any rate, the most astounding part of this trial was the fact that the judge ruled that any evidence related to evolution was inadmissible. The ruling was that, as this was a trial on did this teacher Scopes, did he teach evolution in the classroom, something that is against the law? And Clarence Darrow, his effort, he wanted to put the law on trial, and the judge refused to allow it. He sustained every objection about entering in evidence related to archaeology, anthropology, anything related to geology, anything related to fossilized records and such. And so stymied what Clarence Darrow, the defense attorney, did was he decided to call in an expert on the Bible. And the expert he called on was none other than William Jennings Bryan. And William Jennings Bryan took the stand, even though he didn't have to. He did not have to take the stand. He could have somewhat recused himself. He could have objected that it was highly unorthodox to have the defense calling on the prosecution as a witness. But the William Jennings Bryan agreed to take the stand as an expert on the Bible, and that was kind of the money part of the trial, where Clarence Darrow basically attacked William Jennings Bryan's interpretation of the Bible. William Jennings Bryan espoused I guess you would say in today's vernacular, a dispensationalist, fundamentalist, literalist interpretation of Scripture, and believed that the earth was about 6,000 some odd years old, based on work that had been done by a gentleman by the name of Bishop Ussher, who, by going through the Bible and calculating the age of the patriarchs, we can go to David and then count backward, and the Bible is very good at saying this one lived this many years, this one ruled this many years. So, you can go back into Genesis and read about Methuselah and Noah and Enoch and Adam and Seth, and how long each one of them had lived. And so this Bishop Ussher came up with a calculation that determined that the earth was created about in and around the year 4000 BC. Sharunian has shown up. Good evening to you as well. So I've got a couple people chiming in. Appreciate you being here. I did get your email, Sharunian, and I will be doing a video on doxing. Sharunian's asked me to do a video on doxing, and I plan on doing one. But this trial took place, and I say it's 100 years old. It took place from July 10 to July 21, 1925. So as we speak, 100 years ago today, this trial was taking place in Dayton, Tennessee. Interestingly, it was something of a setup. William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow were familiar with each other. They were both in the later stages of their career. William Jennings Bryan died shortly after the trial. And so they were prominent individuals whose candles were burning out, so to speak. And so they created a media sensation. And the town of Dayton, Tennessee, small little town, sometimes called the Buckle on the Bible Belt, was suffering. It was the roaring 20s, but notwithstanding the booming economy in the 1920s, Dayton wasn't doing too well economically. And so, like the Chamber of Commerce and such, and groups like this thought this would be good for business. We can put Dayton on the map, to use an old expression. And it sure did put them on the map. And so they just needed a teacher who would teach evolution in the classroom. And this Scopes individual, the teacher who was charged, actually basically signed an affidavit saying that he had taught evolution in the classroom. However, later on, he admitted that he couldn't actually remember if he had taught evolution or not. He was there just to facilitate the trial. Maybe some cash played out, maybe some cash traded hands. Here, we'll give you a few $100 if you'll agree that you taught evolution in the classroom. Sure, I'll say I taught evolution in the classroom. And ultimately, spoiler alert, 100-year-old spoiler, ultimately, Scopes was found guilty and was meted out a fine of $100, which the defense refused to pay. They appealed the case, and the conviction was later overturned on a technicality. I don't know what the technicality was, but shortly after the trial, William Jennings Bryan, the former U.S. presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, 3 elections, And in one of those elections, I think it was the 1896 election, he actually got something like 47% of the vote. I went back and checked. I was curious. I had never heard of William Jennings Bryan before learning about this trial all the way back in high school in the 1980s. And how did I come across this trial? How did I find out about it? It was written as a stage play, and the stage play was first performed back in around 1955. And from what we learned in the classroom all the way back then, is that the playwright for the courtroom dialogue just took the transcript from the trial itself. So he didn't have to put words into Clarence Darrow's mouth or into William Jennings Bryan's mouth. He just copied the transcript for the trial portion of the play. Now, anything that took place in the play outside of the trial, then the playwright had to engage in what is typically referred to as poetic license. He had to make it up. And then later, that play was, they developed a screenplay. And the screenplay was turned into a movie called Inherit the Wind. And we actually, in my classroom, again, all the way back in the 80s, I forget what grade, to be honest. I tend to think it was grade 10. Old Mr. England's class. I had a teacher by the name of Mr. England, and he was big on topics like this. We read I remember it was Mr. England taught us Harper Lee's classic book, To Kill a Mockingbird. And when there was a movie, we would watch the movie as well. And so we watched the 1960 version of the movie Inherit the Wind. It has since been remade at least twice. Once it had Kirk Douglas playing the role of William Jennings Bryan. And then another remake was done with George C. Scott playing the role of William Jennings Bryan, this former presidential candidate. But when I was in high school, the only version available, I believe, was the 1960 version, which had an amazing cast. The William Jennings Bryan was played by an actor named Fred March, and many probably won't know that name. That's the only role I know him from. However, I know why he was cast. I'm pretty certain the reason that Fred March was cast is when I look at a picture of William Jennings Bryan from back in around the 1920s and Fred March, they look very much the same. And Clarence Darrow, the defense attorney, was played by none other than Spencer Tracy, who I know very well. Look Who's Coming to Dinner. Famous actor and paramour of Katharine Hepburn. So Spencer Tracy is an actor that I admire. I found him to be an amazing actor. And actually, in looking at pictures of Clarence Darrow and Spencer Tracy, it seemed a pretty good match as well. Not as good as Fred March as Bryan, but close enough. Who else was in the movie? Gene Kelly, Singing in the Rain fame. Gene Kelly was in as a newspaper reporter from the Baltimore Herald. A lot of things that were put on in the play and then the movie were fictionalized. They didn't name Dayton, Tennessee. I believe the paper that was paying for everything was the Chicago Sun-Times, but in the movie they fictionalized it to the Baltimore Herald. I believe that the journalist was H.L. Mencken, a famous journalist from back then, but they fictionalized his name. And I can't remember the name of the character that Gene Kelly played. It will come to me because it's said throughout the movie. And then Harry Morgan of MASH fame, Colonel Potter. He was the judge. Dick York played the role of Scopes. However, in the movie, they fictionalized his name, and his name was Bertram Cates. So that was Dick York from the old Bewitched TV show. And who else? There was also Claude Akins, who was a famous actor. He gained a lot of fame in the 60s and 70s, especially the 70s. He was in a lot of movies about trucking. All of a sudden, if you lived in the 1970s as I did, you'll remember songs like Convoy and Trucking. The trucking industry became somewhat, I don't know, it was something popular to put onto film. And Claude Akins starred in a number of movies, was a prominent actor in a number of movies, and he played the pastor in this town of Dayton, Tennessee. And it's a fascinating, fascinating old movie. You can watch it for free on Tubi, Tubi. And actually, what happened was a week or two ago, I was flipping through what's available on Tubi. It's a free streaming service, and I came across Inherit the Wind, not even aware that the trial was 100 years old, and decided for nostalgia's sake to watch it again. First time I probably have seen the movie in 20 plus years. Back when I had a TV subscription, sometimes I would watch, the late night movies, the old movies. I always enjoyed the old movies. And so I streamed it, watched it, and from a different perspective, because when I watched it back in high school, uh, in around grade 10, my feet were not firmly on the Christian path. And certainly in the years that followed, my feet were not on the Christian path. Now I have embraced my Christian faith starting, in around, we're coming up on 20 years ago since I started to come back to faith. And I say that in that fashion on purpose. Started to come back. I'm I'm still not there, is the point I'm trying to make. I'm still working my way back. However, that is my goal. And I notice the chat isn't very lively. Throw up your thoughts in the live chat. How am I lagging at all? Are there any sound issues? Um, Danny's writing, slightly off topic, but seeing as how you mentioned old TV, I suddenly missed the TV guide. Do you miss it as well? Oh my gosh. We never got the TV guide per se, but we get something similar. In the weekly newspaper, there would be the TV, we'd call it the TV guide, the channel program. And yes, I do miss it. And that's where I would go, and they would have sections that would say movies, old movies, classic movies, and you'd look and see during the course of the week what old movies they're playing, Zulu, or The Great Escape, or Inherit the Wind. And if one jumped out at you, then Thursday night at 10 p.m. on Channel 8. And different world, because then you had to plan your schedule around, because you didn't get to choose. It's not like now with streaming where, you mention to someone and you say, as I did, I mentioned to a colleague at work, have you ever heard of a movie that starred Spencer Tracy, Gene Kelly, Harry Morgan, Dick York, Claude Akins? And this guy I work with, Steve, he's around my age. He's like, no, that sounds like a great movie. Who's in it? Gene Kelly, Spencer Tracy, Dick York from Bewitched. I mean, yeah. And Harry Moore, Colonel Potter. And said, you never heard of this movie? And he said, no, who's in it? And I said, or he said, what is it? I said, Inherit the Wind. He said, oh, I got to watch that. Now, of course, he can go on to Tubi and he can stream it and watch it when he wants. Back in my day, back in the day, someone's old when they use the expression back in the day. Back in the day, you couldn't do that. You would look in the TV guide and see, okay, Thursday night, 10 p.m. And I'd have to say to Steve, "Oh, Thursday, 10 p.m." And oh, I got to make a point to watch it. Now we live in a world, and I told him that about a week or so ago. And I asked him today, "Have you seen it?" And he's like, "No, I haven't looked at it yet, but I'm going to. I'm going to." Yeah, it's a different world that we live in versus when I was growing up, and certainly a different world from back in 1925. Um, Danny's, who's a few years younger than me, not many, but a few, said, "Yeah, we had to hit record on the VCR." We never, for years and years and years growing up, we did not have a VCR. Uh, and the reason I suspect our household, I'm going way off topic, but that's what I enjoy doing on my live stream. Um, we did not, my household when I was growing up was very somewhat anti-tech. And the reason I suspect we were so anti-tech is because back in the 1970s, around 1974, 75, my dad finally broke down and he bought an 8-track player. And he was all excited. "I got an 8-track player." And and of course, if you're of my age, you'll know what happened. 8-tracks were very shortly after 75. It was in the a year or two later, 76, 77, where cassette tapes became all the rage. And then, of course, in the 80s, later came out the CD player. And now, of course, all that has been taken over by streaming. No one no one goes to a record store anymore the way they used to. And that was kind of the point where my dad just tapped out of technology. And so when VCRs came out, my dad was like, "Oh, it's just a fad. It's gonna go away. They're gonna replace it with something else." And he was right. But so we didn't have a VCR, but on occasion you would actually go to, it started out, video stores started being little mom and pop type shops. There was not Blockbuster Video or Rogers Video. There weren't big chains. It was just little hole in the wall stores and a little strip plaza, and you would go in and you could rent a VCR for a weekend or a week, and that was what we would do. And so we never recorded anything off of television. Uh, but at any rate, good memories, good memories. Uh, and Danny's writing, "By the way, back in the day was actually a Wednesday." All right. Anyway, I wanted to get to one particular part of the trial that happened this 100 years ago, Scopes monkey trial. And as I said, the dialogue taking place between the defense and prosecution when Clarence Darrow put William Jennings Bryan on the stand, and that dialogue that took place between the two of them was taken right out of the court transcripts, first in the play and then in the movie. And so, um, and this was eye-opening for me because this was the introduction to me of a concept that takes you away from a literal interpretation of the Bible. And what happened was William Jennings Bryan was asked by Clarence Darrow about the length of the first day of creation. How long was it? Was it a literal 24-hour day? And William Jennings Bryan simply says, "The Bible says it was a day." And Clarence Darrow says, "Yeah, but no sun in the sky to measure it. I mean, how do we know? I mean, the sun wasn't created till the fourth day. Did it have to be a literal 24-hour day?" And William Jennings Bryan says, "Bible says it was a day." And I said, "Yeah, but is it possible it could have been a 25-hour day, a 26-hour day?" And finally, William Jennings Bryan allows. He says, "Well, it's possible." And then Clarence Darrow took that as his opening to say, "Now you interpret, you think, you delve in. Could have been a 25-hour day." And then William Jennings Bryan said something to the effect of, "Well, what I mean to say is it did not necessarily have to be a literal 24-hour day. Could have been 30 hours, could have been a day, it could have been a week, could have been a month, could have been a year." Could have been 10,000 years, could have been, and then he grabbed a fossilized remain that had been ruled inadmissible evidence, and he said it could have been 10 million years. And that's an interesting point that came out in the movie. And it was kind of my introduction to that, to this idea that how long is a day? Because back then, back when I was in high school, I could not have told you on what day in the Genesis account was the sun created, but that movie put it in, indelibly marked it on my brain that the sun was created on the fourth day. So the first 3 days of creation, there was no sun, and the sun is what we use, regardless of what model of the universe, whether you're heliocentric or geocentric. Either way, the sun is an integral component in determining how long a day is. A day is 24 hours long. It goes from sunrise to sunrise. The way we measure time now is the day starts, typically tend to think of the day starting with the sun coming up, and it ends the following morning when the sun comes up again. Not literally. I know I'm off the way we do it now. It's at midnight when the sun isn't even in the sky, but regardless. Um, Another aspect to this movie, though, that I think is important and significant to put out there is the fact that the movie, the way it was put forward, was very much in what I refer to as what everyone calls a straw man. It was a straw man argument put out by those who wanted to promote the theory, Darwin's unproven, and I would say ultimately false theory of evolution. I do not believe in Darwin's theory of evolution. I've spoken about it on this channel before. And the fact that at its core, the Darwinian theory of evolution holds that the origin of life is out of the so-called primordial soup, that you had all these different compounds, proteins, amino acids, catalysts. You have all this soup, primordial soup, and that magically, poof, spontaneous generation, life just happened. And science has tried. A number of researchers have tried to prove that Darwin was right. They have conducted experiments going back well over 100 years, 100 plus years going. Louis Pasteur did experiments trying to prove that Darwin was right, that inanimate, I can't even say the word, lifeless matter, inanimate, lifeless matter can come to life. And he tried to prove it, and countless others have tried after Pasteur, and no one's been able to prove it. And so it has led to the scientific conclusion that only life can create life. So what that means is there has to be a first mover. Life, if only life begats life, then who is the first mover? The first mover from a Christian perspective, from my perspective, is God. That's the word we use. I find the word God problematic, but every language is limiting. So we do what we have to do. And so I've spoken many times about one of my favorite passages early in the book of Exodus, when Moses is in front of the burning bush and he asks God for a name, and God isn't playing by that game. And the King of the universe, Lord God, creator of all things, when Moses says, "What name shall I give the Hebrew people when I go and I say that the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I go before them, what name shall I give them?" And God simply says, "I am. I exist." Force, power, stick whatever label on it you want. But I've digressed now, and I got to get back to where I was. And so there's this straw man argument being put forward in the movie. And the way they do this is by making William Jennings Bryan and all the Christians appear like a bunch of morons. That's the goal. Let's make these Christians look stupid. And they do a good job. It's Hollywood, even in 1960. Spencer Tracy, amazing actor. And Fred March, I guess he's probably a good actor as well. He was told to portray this William Jennings Bryan as a bumbling idiot, fool, moron, bombastic, and, ego on steroids. And so during the courtroom session, which, by the way, this was a setup, William Jennings Bryan and Spencer Tracy, or William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow, I'm convinced they colluded beforehand and they had decided this is how we're going to do this. It's a chance for us to go toe to toe, one against the other. But at any rate, at one point, Clarence Darrow brings forth a rock, a fossilized rock with an impression of a fish or something, that a fossilized remain of a fish inside a rock. And when they get onto this point about how old is the Earth, the Clarence Darrow says, this rock, according to so and so paleontologist with the University of whatever, says that this rock is over 10 million years old or 5 million years old or however many years of age. And William March, or playing the role of William Jennings Bryan, Fred March playing William Jennings Bryan, says, I'm more interested in the Rock of Ages than the ages of rocks, and makes him look buffoonish. I saw a later rendering of that same exchange where it was Kirk Douglas playing the role of William Jennings Bryan. And Kirk Douglas delivered the line in what I consider to be probably far closer to the way it was actually said back 100 years ago. And Kirk Douglas delivered the line and said it, I'm more interested in the Rock of Ages than in the ages of rocks. Same words, but the way it's portrayed by Fred March makes Christians in general look stupid. And I think that was the aim. This is the whole purpose of a straw man. If you want to promote the evolutionary theory and you want to denigrate the creationist theory, what you do is you put out a movie and you make all the creationists look stupid, ignorant, backward, and you make all the evolutionary proponents look super intelligent and wise and smart. And then the viewer sits back and says, well, I don't want to identify with the ignorant, stupid mob in this movie. And they really do a hammering job on Christians. And I don't want to say definitively that this is what caused me to walk away from my Christian faith, but I do think it was a contributing factor. And I watched it again just within the last week or so. And I still appreciate the movie because, as it turns out, Clarence Darrow was likely, in my opinion, probably a Christian. He just did not share the same fundamentalist, literalist interpretation of the Bible that William Jennings Bryan had. William Jennings Bryan, every word was to be taken literally. If the Bible says it's a day, it's a day. However, we also know from the Bible that to the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years to the Lord is but a day. And so the first day of creation, second day, third day, before the sun was created, could have been thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years. Just some interesting thoughts. Anyone have any comments? There was so much I could have talked about tonight. We got the Epstein file, garbage, nonsense. It's not garbage. It's not nonsense. It's real. Epstein did have prominent individuals going down to that island. And if they released names, I'm sure there would be some names not on the list and some very high up names. And then what you would have, I'm certain that there are people who are wealthy and powerful and influential enough that they can go down to a little pedophilic island like Epstein's little island there and that they can go down completely under the radar. However, there are other individuals like prominent politicians, prominent media personalities, actors, and such. And if they brought out a list of the low hanging fruit, I think it would open up finger pointing. Well, it wasn't just me. And then more names would start to come out. And so, just some random thoughts on the Epstein list. It's going to hurt Trump badly, because anyone with two brain cells to rub together realize that Jeffrey Epstein and his girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, Mark Carney's buddy there, that they were not acting alone. Prince Andrew, we all know about that. We've seen the pictures of Jeffrey Epstein with Bill Gates, with Bill Clinton, with Trump himself, with the movers and shakers. I'm not going to say any names beyond that, but I'm convinced it would be earth-shattering if that list came out. And I'm all in favor of it. I do not like things that operate in the shadows. I'm a Christian. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And truth loves sunlight. Evil loves darkness. And Danny's writing that half of Hollywood is probably on that list. And he's writing again that Jesus is king, and he is. I mentioned Mark Carney, and his association with Ghislaine Maxwell. There are all kinds of pictures out there, the two of them chummy, rubbing elbows. Mark Carney, possible. Wouldn't surprise me. Nothing would. Governor of the Bank of England, governor of the Bank of Canada, wealthy, powerful, influential individual who left his $1 million a year gig managing Brookfield Asset Management as the chair, and he came down. Took a big step back because his little protege Trudeau was too much of an idiot, and so Mark had to come in and rescue things, as it were, to assure that the agenda being put forward continues to go forward. And now we found out that Mark Carney lied. What a shock. How do you know when Mark Carney's lying? His lips move. His disclosure of his financial assets. We finally got to see it after the election, when he was appointed as leader of the Liberal Party. He had 90 days from that point to disclose his financial assets to the ethics commissioner, and then the ethics commissioner had to wait 90 days before that was released to Canadians, so 180 days. Mark Carney was installed as prime minister on March 28th, or in and around that time. So April, May, June, July, the 180 days have gone by. And so now we get to see that Mark Carney, his financial assets include 3 Canadian companies, 1, 2, 3, and 300 plus American companies. What a shock. Mr. Elbows Up is heavily invested in the US economy, hardly any footprint at all in the Canadian economy. But anyone with any brains knew that Mark Carney was lying. And so there's that in the news. Then we have news. I talk a lot on this channel about what's going on in the Middle East, in particular with Israel. I do have some more thoughts on that. But now we have Israel coming to the defense of the Druze minority in Syria, who are under attack from this new HTS-led government in Syria. And Israel is coming to their defense. Will there be a ceasefire in Gaza? Will there not? We'll see. My support for Israel is unwavering. I don't think Benjamin Netanyahu is a saint, far from it. I think he's an incredibly flawed individual. I think he's done a lot of things wrong, but then again, So has Carney. So has Donald Trump. So did Joe Biden. I find it duplicitous that there's one standard held for the nation state of Israel and another standard for Canada or another standard for the United States. Many of the crimes that we in the West love to, the left, the Guardian type individuals love to point at Israel for their supposed for their failings, and they do have them. They'll point at them for their failings as if they're the worst crimes ever committed by humanity, and yet the same things were done in Canada, same things have been done in the United States, but it's different. It's different when Israel is involved because Israel is the world's only Jewish nation state. And so you get into hatred of Jews and all things Jewish. So there's that in the news. And I don't know what else is happening in the news. I am paying close attention, but there's so much out there, and there's no one dominating narrative right now. Got the Epstein file. You've got weather 30 degrees plus, as if, being hot in the summer is suddenly different. But anyway, I'm rambling. I've gone on for 46 minutes. If you made it all the way this far, I'll stop rambling now. Invite you to hit the like, the subscribe, and share comments down below if you're watching this on replay. And it's now July 16th, 11:20 p.m. I will be publishing more content in the days and weeks ahead. Probably be at a slower pace during these busy summer months. Pray for my sciatic nerve. Sitting here right now like this, it actually feels normal. So once I get up and moving, the things start to hurt. At any rate, Danny's writing amen and amen. Good night, y'all. Channeling is inner Southern American. I'll end the video the way I like to end many of my videos with a blessing taken from the book of Numbers. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord grant you peace. And if you want to go back and check out that movie, Inherit the Wind, 1960, you can watch it, but be aware that the producers, the makers, the writers of that movie very much wanted to denigrate the Christian faith. And I still think there's value in it, but you need to be aware of that going in. So God bless, and we'll see you all in a night or two, hopefully. Good night.